Okay, that is not a problem. Good evening. Good evening. Let's try it again. Good evening. Good evening. Much better, thank you. Welcome to the fifth program in the 2025 Great Stone Viaduct Winter Lecture Series. Welcome everyone. Thank you for braving the weather tonight to come out. I know you're all excited to learn about the people of America tonight, and we will get to that. But first, because I am the library director here, I do have to do my due diligence and promote the library and its offerings. Last week, for those of you who were here, you heard me steal a line from MasterCards and let you all know that your library cards are priceless. This week, I'm taking a cue from Capital One and asking you what's in your wallet. If the answer is library card, more money should also be tucked in that wallet. Last year, our average library card holder checked out around 36 items in 2024. That cost savings of over $700. Even if your credit card gives you a 5% cash back reward incentive, you have to spend $14,000 to earn $700 cash. And that $700 that your library card saves you, that's that's on average. And I know a lot of you here are more than average library users. Probably have a stack of 11 books or more waiting to be read like I do. But that $700 doesn't include the price of admissions programs like these or little bookworms, story times for kids ages 3 to pre-K, or our summer reading programs, which are for all ages. Doesn't include our online databases, access to our online databases, which can be very expensive if you're doing it on your own. Doesn't include our free Wi-Fi or computer access for those who don't have those resources at home. So when I ask what's in your wallet, I hope there's a library card in it, and if it isn't, if there isn't, come see me after the program, I'll hook you up. It's instant cash savings the first time you check out a book, so there's no reason not to have them. So, okay, I got that on the system. So, and Eric was asking me if I had a zinger today, so I'm going to do my best. Anticipating this next program, I was trying to think of a pun or two that would cover ancient migration patterns in the Americas. But no matter how hard I tried, they only came off as borderline funny. So I decided not to cross into that territory tonight. However, I will extend a bridge to our partners in this series, the Great Stone Viaduct Historical Education Society, to tell you a little bit about what they have coming up.
Thank you so much. So I'm so glad you could all come back with us again for the Winter Marching. So we're in our second month of the Winter Lecture Series. We have several more programs coming up to finish out this year's Winter Lecture Series. We hope you can join us for the rest. Again, thanks for coming out. Hopefully there's no more snow. Say that. Shouldn't have said that, right? Knock on wood. But hopefully our weather holds out and we can finish up the lecture series. One of the things that we do partnership with the library of the Great Stone Viaduct Society, and we've been around for a little while now and done some great things, and we have some great things that we hope to accomplish in the future. Always preserving the history of Blair and just really trying to involve our community, because obviously, guys, community is everything in the town of Blair. We know everyone, and it's up to us to keep that future bright for the next generation. So we'd love to have you guys as members of the Great Stone Viaduct. If you have not had a chance to learn about us, we have a website. We also have a Facebook page. We're the Great Stone Viaduct on Facebook, if you have Facebook, and we also have a website with Great Stone Viaduct if you'd ever like to see any of the things that we've done or been working on. It's a great visit. Or you can ask any of the members here tonight if you'd like to learn more. And right now, if you join with a $50 membership, we have a beautiful calendar that you can hang on your refrigerator or take with you, and it has some of our projects and our upcoming adventures we hope to include maybe next year. So if you guys would like to become members, we'd love to have you. There's some information on the back table, and we hope to see you in the rest of the lecture series. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Erica. We will get started with the program shortly tonight, but you all know that I do have a few quick announcements before we do get started. The first one is if you are new to the library, you need to use the restrooms at some point. They're through the hallway the left, to the left. You'll see the men's on the left and the women's on the right. Our programs are being live streamed. You can always revisit tonight's program if you want on our website, or if you know that you're going to miss one in the future or you've missed one in the past, they are on our Facebook page, our YouTube channel, and our website. We do have a new website, which most of you know, because most of you are coming to these programs on a regular basis. But our new website is BelAirPublicLibrary.org, and we have a calendar of events on there that have all of our upcoming programs on it. And so please do check that out. And then finally, out of respect for our speakers tonight, I do ask that everybody please silence their cell phones now. And then next week, we have with us Dr. Christina Fasanic, Professor of English at Penn West, California, which is the California University of Pennsylvania. She will be giving a lecture, Pulling the Thread, Untangling Wheeling History. Dr. Fasanic's passion for historical storytelling has taken her on a journey through local, state, and national archives, where she has unfolded the tapestry of Wheeling's rich past. Her essays pull a thread leading to unexpected connections and revelations that weave narratives that transcend time, bringing to light forgotten stories and hidden ties. Her book of essays, Pulling the Thread, Untangling Wheeling History, covers unexpected connections to Wheeling, such as Mark Twain, the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, the 1878 World Expo in Paris, and many other interesting facts. So that's next week, Wednesday, March 12th at 6 p.m., Untangling Wheeling History with Professor Christina Fasanic. Now on to tonight's program, The Peopling of North America, Ohio, and Beyond. Our guest tonight, Dr. Joe Gingerich, is an associate professor at Ohio University. His research focuses on hunting and gathering societies, New World colonization, human-environmental interactions, and lithic technology. His recent work focused on the spatial patterning of artifacts at hunter-gatherer campsites in both Kenya and North America. His current fieldwork centers on the earliest known sites in the region, with recent projects in Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Ohio. He is the editor of 2 volumes in this early Archaeology of Eastern North America, in the Eastern Fluted Point Traditions, Volume 1 and 2, through University of Utah Press. His research has been funded by National Science Foundation, the National Geographic, and Smithsonian Institute. Please welcome with us tonight, Dr. Joseph Gingerich.
All right, thank you. And thanks for the invitation to be here. Yes, as Aaron said, I study a lot of different things, but no matter where I am, I'm usually studying hunter-gatherers. And Ohio actually has a really rich history of some of the first people here in North America. And so I'm going to start off by talking directly about the peopling of the New World, the first people that were here before any Europeans, people that may have been here 14, 15, who knows, maybe even much before that. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that history, and then I'll get to a little bit of research that I'm doing here in Ohio, and you'll get to see that Ohio has these same early sites that I'm going to talk about across North America, but also from a broader perspective about where these first people came from. So first, I always like to start out saying that when Columbus arrived in the New World, the only thing he really discovered were that people were already here. And from that very moment, there was vast speculation about who were these people, where they came from, how long have they been here, and this goes all the way to who built the mounds, to early estimates and speculation that maybe they came from Asia. A Spanish priest actually proposed this back in the 1500s, and he may very well be correct. But this debate and this discussion, we really made a lot of progress in archaeology in 1927 where this distinctive point found between the ribs of bison tickwis was found by a cowboy looking for lost cows. And immediately he realized that this was too large to be the bones of at least the cows that he was looking for. This would be followed by a discovery in Clovis, New Mexico in the early 1930s, where that projectile point that you just saw, and I'll talk more about this projectile point style in just a second, but this projectile point style that I just showed you, these were found underneath. And because of this discovery, we call these Clovis points, for where they were found in Clovis, New Mexico. Time and time again, these similar style projectile points would be found with some of the largest animals on the landscape, such as mammoths in Clovis, New Mexico, Naco, Arizona, Denton, Colorado, Colby, Wyoming, and other sites. And this all led to the idea that these people were proficient hunters. And not just hunting any game, but some of the largest game ever known in North America. Mammoth, mastodon here in Ohio mostly, but bison that were as tall at the shoulders as 6 feet. So massive, massive animals. When we look at these characteristic, what we call fluted points, based on the way that this basal treatment is, with this finning, or what we call a flute, driven up from the bottom, these projectile points are found all throughout North America. For decades, over a century, we have considered these to be the first widespread evidence of people in North America. I would still say that they are the first widespread evidence of people, but whether or not they are first is a different question. What we do know is that when we do find these projectile points in this projectile point style, no matter where we pick it up, whether it's in Wyoming, New Mexico, or even here in Ohio, it tends to look exactly the same and also date almost the same. So that all of these projectile point styles really date within a few hundred years of one another, roughly right about 13,000 years ago. So we know that 13,000 years ago, there's a population of people in North America that share the same technology. It is one of the kind of rare cases in prehistory where a similar type of technology, very, very similar type of technology, was maintained across such vast space. So, one of the ways that archaeologists used to explain this rapid movement of people was that it was this hunting. We found them with the mammoths, we found them with the bison, and maybe it was this sort of tracking large game across the continent that allowed them to spread so quickly. Hunting, we often think of as a transferable skill, meaning that if you know how to hunt, if you know animal behavior, if you have the right technology, maybe for you it's a rifle, maybe for them it was a large spear point, that is geographically transferable, that you could go to Colorado and you could hunt elk or something. Some of you may jump on a plane based on your knowledge here. You can go out there and hunt because you have the weapons to do it and you know something about animal behavior, and then after you kill it, you know how to butcher it, clean it, take care of it. And so this was a way that we had sort of described the peopling of North America. These people traveling down through North America, following animals across the landscape. I would say that this story was kind of perfect until the 1990s. I would say this was a very coherent story until the 1990s, where people came down through the High Street corridor, and I'll talk more about this in just a bit, came down through the High Street corridor, or maybe they came along a Pacific Coast route, and within about 1,000 years, they were able to colonize all of North and South America. Given the time period of what we have for Clovis, at that kind of 13,000 year mark, we assume that they probably came down through about 14,000 years ago. And then they rapidly would have spread through North and South America within about 1,000 years. And by the way, at the same time, a lot of these animals, these large swarms of bison, mammoths, mastodons, and actually 35 other species went extinct. We explain that by the idea of overkill. These people actually hunted them to extinctions because throughout many times in prehistory, there were ice ages, climate got cold, it got warm, and these animals survived, but they didn't survive when humans were around. And so this would be this coherent story. Well, what happened in the 1990s? Well, archaeologists have always looked for old sites. We like looking for the oldest things, okay? But by the 1990s, there were many sites throughout North America. Not all of these were found or known in 1990, but a few sites in South America, specifically Monte Verde, was found in the 80s and 90s. And people started to ask this kind of basic question, well, how can people be all the way in South America, maybe 14,000 years ago, in a place like Monte Verde, Chile, if they are older than Clovis, this widespread population? You know, people criticize the artifacts, saying there was few stone tools, wondering if the dates were accurate. We still have some debates about these things. One difficulty when you're dealing with sites so old is you usually only have stone. You have stone tools. You have the debris from making stone tools. At very few sites do we have good preservation to look at the organic materials. So if one site has a lot of organic material, but you don't have a lot of stone, you don't have a lot to compare it with when you're looking at other sites across the Americas. Meadowcroft Rock Shelter, a place only, probably about an hour and a half from here. This site, excavated by Jim Atabasio in the 70s, published more consistently in the 1980s, showed a sequence that suggests that people may have been right here in, well, not Ohio, but southwestern Pennsylvania, anywhere from 16,000 to even 19,000 years ago. In the 90s and early 2000s, Joe McAvoy started surveying for sites in southeastern Virginia. And in the late 90s, he was excavating this site called Cactus Hill, with dates anywhere from 17 to 15,000 years ago. So, as you can see, this sort of coherent story that we were talking about, where we just had Clovis across North America, and it all dated to the same time frame. This is starting to be thrown into question because of the discovery of these sites that really, many of them, you start seeing more and more by the 1990s. This has continued today. We have sites like Paisley Cave in Oregon, talk about not having a lot of stone tools, although they do. They have a projectile point, but what was really the smoking gun, or sometimes I say the kind of steam herd, if you will, is coprolites, human feces, food. we could date these directly. And these turned out to be about 1,000 years older than Clovis. Or at least what we think the age range of Clovis is. One good thing about the preservation of this type of organic remain is we could get DNA from it. And right now, if you were to ask me, what's going to be the biggest advancements made in this Paleo-Indian archaeology, as we refer to it, this early or first American archaeology, I would tell you that in the next 20 years, it's going to be genetics. As we can get better at sequencing them, as we have better techniques to recover them, this is probably going to tell us a lot about when and how people came from. But what we know right now in North America, and this was also supported by the Paisley Cave material too, is that this haplogroup, members of the same genetic lineage, that most of what we see in North America is either A, B, C, D, or X. There is some X. If you look at this map, A, C, and D, and B, these are all coming from Asia. Now, there is some X that is coming from Europe, and so this kind of tells a part of the story. Paisley Cave, other sites in South America, site in Montana, all fall into that A and B category. Other sites, speaking of this X, but speaking of sites of great antiquity in North America, in the Delmarva Peninsula, in Maryland and Virginia, a large cluster of early fluid point sites is known from that area. But in recent years, an archaeologist named Darren Lowry and also Dennis Stanford spent a lot of time scouring the eastern shore and have claimed to have found sites as old as 22,000 years ago, anywhere from 17 to 22,000 years ago. Moving on to this kind of complex picture. This site, I don't know if you've heard about it, but White Sands, New Mexico. This was published in Science Magazine in 2021. And this is probably some of the most intriguing evidence of early people in North America. These footprints was recovered on basically what was used to be salt flat. That when people were walking across this area, it was a moist kind of marsh area, and these footprints that were quickly buried after they were laid down, and they found these in several different spots. And I don't know how well you can see this, but in several different locations, these dates date anywhere from 21 to 22,000 years ago. These are some of the oldest dates that we have of people in North America. I would say maybe that they are the oldest dates, but they're the oldest dates where the evidence or the archaeology is intriguing enough for us to debate them. And this isn't one ongoing debate. Since this site was found, there's probably been 10 different papers published back and forth, refuting something, supporting something. Just one was published last week with other evidence from White Sands. But one reason why I wanted to mention White Sands to you is that it creates a really interesting situation. Most people that I talk to, if you ask them, where did people come from, 13,000 years ago? these Paleo-Indian groups in North America. They'll tell you the Barren Land Bridge that people walk across. That is like the kind of classic hypothesis. Well, if you have sites in North America, I'm not going to debate whether the sites are all accurate, whether the dating is accurate, but let's just say you have several sites that are even older than 16,000 years ago. But if you do have sites that are 22,000 years ago, which I listed a couple, you got to really think about, well, what does that mean for the colonization process? This is what North America looked like during the last glacial maximum. Ice sheets are down over most of Ohio, or about half of Ohio. It's down across places like Montana, Wyoming. You have other various ice sheets. And so during this time, and during these different ice age events, you have time when that Barren Land Bridge is open and when it is closed. So if we're going to think about the Barren Land Bridge as a route for people to take, we have to really pay attention to these different glaciation events. So, for example, the bridge is available from that sort of 22,000 year period when we have glaciation, all the way up to until kind of at the end of that ice age, whether it's probably 11,000 years ago or so, I'm not sure the exact date when it picks back up. But what I'm trying to say here is that if people are here 22,000 years ago, they may have very well had to come before the last ice age. Because this ice free corridor that you see here, it doesn't look like this until anywhere from 14 to 15,000 years ago. So, each of these routes that I kind of briefly talked about, and I'll go over again in just a second, they have particular time. So, 22,000 years ago, you could not have walked to North America. You would have faced a huge sheet of ice. A huge sheet of ice. This corridor does not open up to anywhere from 14 to 15,000 years ago. Now, that's all the time in the world for a group like Clovis to make that technology and spread across North America and into South America. But it's not necessarily in time for some of these really early sites that have been found. So we want to think about some different routes. If people are taking this interior route, it's open before 28,000 years ago. But beginning much after that, it starts to get filled in with ice. By 22,000 years ago to 18,000 years ago, that's when the ice sheets are the thickest. So it's not open again until about 14,500 years ago. 15,000 is kind of still in question whether it's clear enough for people to go through it. Now people would just say, well, maybe they just came by the Pacific Coast route. Well, it's probably only open before about 23,000. So that means if people are in New Mexico by, say, 22,000, or say on the eastern shore by 22,000, in places that are like modern day Maryland or Virginia, does that mean they came before the last glaciation? And then it's open again after 16,000 years ago. I say that it's open because this scenario where you have these ice sheets piled up along the coastline, it is not a successful scenario for people traveling by boat, because all people traveling by boat have to have some access to inland resources. And so can you imagine trying to pull your boat up on that ice? But it's 9, 10 feet tall and big clumps of ice falling down on top of you, it's not a great navigation scenario. So the couple big routes that have been proposed here is, yes, the classic land bridge, but we have to really think of that as only a viable pathway after 14,500 years ago. They could have an interior Pacific coast route by about 15,000, or they could have this Pacific coast route anywhere from 16 to 15,000 years ago. Last, and a pathway that has gotten a lot of attention in the past probably 2 decades, proposed by Dennis Stanford and Bruce Bradley, was an idea that people may have come across the North Atlantic. This would provide one scenario about how people could have gotten here at the height of the last ice age. And so, what I guess I'm saying is to not so much debate individual sites, but if you have so many sites that are 22,000 years ago, really limits when or how people got here. Meaning, maybe they came before the last glaciation, or maybe they had to come a very specific route. People are only here 15,000 years ago. Well, they have a couple different, or 3 different routes they could have possibly taken. And so each of these are some of the big questions, not only how old are sites in North America, but which directions or which pathways do people travel. So I would say that if you wanted me to come up with a list, which I did for you guys, talking about some key issues in New World colonization, is 1, the presence of pre-Clovis populations. When are they here? What do they date to? Were they also successful populations? Meaning that they got to North America, they had, say, a large enough breeding population and was able to be successful long term. Some people have proposed that Clovis, because of their uniform technology, because they date to such a tight time frame, maybe that was the first successful colonization. So it doesn't mean they were the very first, but maybe they were the only ones to be successful. So maybe if that was the case, how did Clovis move so quickly? What were their social networks like? Or whether or not it was Clovis or someplace else, I think a bigger and more interesting question is just how do people behave on a pretty much empty landscape? And this is a lot of what I'm interested in my own research. How do people connect and be successful when no one has been there before? Sure, people that are familiar with living on the land, they can adapt pretty quickly. But what does it look like if you have multiple migrations of people coming in? How do they interact? How do they sort of maintain certain technologies across all of North America? When did colonization end? When and where do we see territories? So one thing is just to think about this process of these first people coming into North America. 13, 15, maybe 17,000 years ago, or before that. But when did this colonization process end? Can we find places where it was delayed? Are these places where we could look to maybe better understand this process? Last, what were lifeways like? So I'm going to spend a couple minutes just talking about some of these territories that we can see very early in time. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about Ohio and some ideas about how we can learn more about, I believe, the people in North America. And yes, I'm saying right here in Ohio, I think would be a great place to learn more about this peopling process. We may not have the oldest sites, but we may be able to answer some of these questions, which would inform us about the process. So first, if we look in eastern North America, and this is taken mostly from the Northeast where I've done a lot of my research, but you sort of have a change in these fluted point styles over time. What we don't see is we don't really see much regionalization with Clovis. It seems to be everywhere. But by about 12,700 years ago, with projectile points like the Burke Vale that had these really deeply indented styles, we start to see that they're more isolated on the landscape. Like for example, we have several of these in the Northeast, but we only have a handful in Ohio. Once you get to these fully fluted styles, we call them Folsom in the west, but back east we have several different variations of them in both the mid-continents and then in the Northeast. One thing that we've been able to do with looking at interaction and looking at how people may be using the landscape, these red dots and then these green dots, these red dots represents really long distance movements. These are select sites on the landscape where people made all of their tools. Sometimes 20, 30, 40 spear points. 500 scrapers for scraping hides. And they traveled 200-300 miles carrying that stone. That's what these red dots represent. People have wondered whether or not these are these sort of pioneering movements, these first movements into new territories. The other thing that we notice is with some of the earliest sites, these green dots, these seem to be the most commonly used quarries, places where people got stone for making stone tools. And of course, this is not all of the stone that people use. We see the same thing here in Ohio as well, around the Conshohocken quarries, where people are moving stone around the state of Ohio. Where carefully mapped, we can sometimes see the movements of different types of stone. So talk about territories. All these green dots here represents metavolcanic rhyolites from North Carolina, and all these sites here represents coastal plain cherts. And then you see the separation between two other types of cherts in this Tennessee, Kentucky area. So by somewhere around 13,000, maybe 12,500 years ago, this is the first time we can start mapping territories. That could have implications for saying something about when people first got to these particular regions. Can't tell you exactly what that means yet, because that's the big question, but the question would be, do these specific territories take a long time to develop or short times to develop? How do we envision people moving across the landscape? So now I get to maybe try and answer some of these with Ohio. So if you were looking at this map, these are all of the fluted point finds across North America. All the fluted point finds that have been documented in this Paleo-Indian database of America started by David Anderson at the University of Tennessee. And we can see that Ohio has a huge density of these first people. I recently redid the Ohio Fluted Point Survey, which you can see there on the left. Ohio now has the fourth highest number of these 13,000 to 12,000 year old projectile points anywhere in North America. So there were a lot of people here, and or they discarded a lot of their spirit points. On the right is all the individual precise locations that we have of these 2,145 fluid points found in Ohio. If we look at Ohio, we start to see a more kind of interesting trend in the way that people are clustering, or at least the way these fluid points are clustering. It's hard to know what fluid points represent. Are they just evidence of hunting? Are they individual sites? But regardless, it's where people spend time. And so you can see that a lot of it is along the glacial front. You also have a lot of it that occurs and loops around the Great Lakes area and are clustering around a lot of these glacial water features. What you're seeing in the dark blue, these are recreated wetlands or glacial water features. Also, a reminder about why we would choose to look in Ohio for some of this. Well, remember that site, Colby, Wyoming, where I said, people hunted mammoth? One of the other interpretations of this site, it wasn't different from the fact that people hunted mammoth, was that they proposed that this was a neat cache, that they piled up the bones of the mammoth. You can see that big stack there, to keep it. Well, right here in Ohio, we have similar types of sites. This is the burning tree mastodon. The distribution of bones to the left is what you would expect if you found a natural death of this mastodon. To the right is what the archaeologists found. One, not all the bones were there. Two, they are clustered up in these piles. The archaeologists at the time had argued, or one of the researchers there argued that maybe this was indeed one of these neat caches. Well, remember, I had mentioned to you before that you have these kind of interesting sites where people made a bunch of stone tools from a single tool type or toolstone type, and then they moved it long distances. Well, Ohio has that too. This is Paleo Crossing in Medina, Ohio. This is some of the work of Matt Boulanger and Matt Aaron, who was able to chemically source many of these early tools from a source down in Indiana that traveled all the way up to Medina County. Clovis, I didn't talk about this before, but Clovis has also been known for caches. Big piles of stone that we think that maybe people were caching for possible ritual purposes, or maybe it was a way of wayfinding, a way to give, say, an unknown landscape, maybe a featureless landscape, and or just saying, we're traveling a lot, we don't want to go all the way back to that stone source we know, but we're going to place in the ground a bunch of finished projectile points, stone tools, so that we can come back and get these. Some of these were probably ritual, some of these may have been utilitarian in that sense of trying to create stockpiles of stone across the landscape. We possibly have some of these here in Ohio, a site reported in central Ohio by Benton Aaron, I believe in Knox County, if I'm not mistaken. So, in short, Ohio really has it all. Ohio has all of these different site types. But what I think is really interesting, say that you're interested in studying this sort of colonization process, like I said that I am. I want to not know just, what's the oldest site, because that's only so interesting. Sure, it's always neat to find the oldest thing. But it's actually a better story if you can describe how people did something. What really gets people interested in history, I feel like, is to learn all the work it took to build the great viaduct here, or the process, why it was done. Well, if you want to learn about maybe the peopling of North America and how people did that, maybe it's Ohio. Because Ohio may have been the last place that people colonized. The reason why is because it was glaciated. This lower band represents what the ice sheets looked like 22,000 years ago. So hey, if people are at White Sands 22,000 years ago, they're not living in northern Ohio. Now, if people are, say, in the Delmarva Peninsula 19,000 years ago, or Metcalfe Rockville from 19,000 years ago, they're still not living in the northernmost part of Ohio. And even if you want to look at Cactus Hill, they're still not able to get to all parts of Ohio. So what does that mean for us? Well, when we're studying probably some of these fluted point populations, right here in Ohio, they came in first. And we know that we have the fourth largest record of them anywhere in North America. Sounds like a great place to understand this process. You might even get lucky enough to find some of the oldest sites in Ohio if you look in the right places. So, where to look? Well, the one thing that I sort of mentioned to you before is that we were able to map all of these fluted point sites all throughout Ohio. Well, it seems like one of the major trends is that these fluted points are often found by wetlands and or glacial lakes. We actually don't know what they are. We don't know, like this map that showing you these are recreated glacial lacustrine deposits. So these could be kettle ponds, they could be kettle lakes, they could be bogs, or they could be wetlands. Well, about 30% of all Paleoindian sites that we know of in Ohio occur around these features. So these areas, as we know, they're ecologically diverse, lots of plants and animals. We also know that they are concentrated resources, where that in, say, a very, open part of Ohio, these would be great places to find your mammoths, your mastodons with small game. Great plant resources. And so following just basic ecological theory that both animals, also humans being animals and hunter-gatherers, that they should occupy the richest resource areas first. Well, I would argue that wetlands may have been some of these richest resource areas. So in the future, we at Ohio University are going to be looking a lot around these wetlands. And I would predict that we might find some of the first sites in Ohio. Maybe it's like the burning tree mastodon that also had a very early date to it. But we may be able to tell more about this colonization process. Potentially people jumping from rich resource patch to rich resource patch, moving quickly across the landscape. So to sort of summarize, I can easily tell you that North America was colonized at least 14,500 years ago. This is before Clovis, but we know that Clovis was created in North America. That's the only place we see this sort of technology. How much more? I think it's too hard to speculate. How did people colonize North America? Well, I think if we want to look at this clustering of 15, 16, 17,000 year old sites, waterways make a lot of sense. But I think we should also kind of throw out the idea that it had to be one pathway. people are probably coming to North America multiple times throughout thousands and thousands of years. And so it might be a water pathway, but it might be both interior and marine pathways. Understanding lifeways, as I just said, I think some of the regional surveys that we can do here could be really important to answer these questions. And to that point, if you have any of these early fluid points, all that information that I presented to you about site locations in Ohio, why I think Ohio is a great place to do this research, comes from this fluid point survey. So please feel free to contact me or some of my colleagues. If you want to talk to someone that is not a professional archaeologist, which sometimes people do, Gary Agribright, a great person, will record, take a picture of your points, and we can start mapping these patterns over time. So with that, I'll open the floor to questions.
I don't have a question.
Yeah.
But I had the privilege of having a dad that hunted artifacts for 60 years.
Hang on a
Dug
second.
flint at
Nancy.
Flint.
We want to give you
No, I got a big mouth.
People can't hear you.
I had a father that hunted artifacts for 60 years.
Yeah.
I have dug flint at Flint Ridge with him, walked the cornfields down at Capteen Creek, found a lot of arrowheads. His greatest find was from Seneca Lake. He found, this was 40 years ago, one of only 3 mastodon bones in the state of Ohio, and it was the hip ball joint from the rear leg. And it's at Ohio State Historical Center. He donated all of his, he had ceremonial axes, he had scraping tools, he had arrowheads that were tiny for fowl so they could get the feathers for their headdresses. We've dug geodes with him. I have a geode in my garden that's as big as a basketball. So I had the privilege of learning this from my dad.
Great. Yeah, I mean, and that's really this 2,100 points I talked about, they come from people like their fathers sharing that information with us so that we can start to understand this really interesting question. And so, yeah, I mean, without people that have taken care of their collections throughout the years and documented the notes, we wouldn't know half of what we do about the state of Ohio or the people in North America.
You know, I have a screen time that your father gave to me while your mom worked in my office, and it contains a flint that he found in an arrowhead, or a point that he found somewhere.
Yeah.
And I still have that screen pad up. Anybody else that has questions?
Yeah.
The big animals you were talking about, is that they went for the big animals for hunting?
Yeah.
Can you repeat that?
The big animals you were talking about in the beginning, was that for food?
Yeah. I mean, so we have over 14 sites, 15 to 16 sites right now that people widely accept that these early Clovis people hunted mammoths or mastodons, and we also have the evidence that they consumed them. Now, this is not to say, and people often think, well, this is the only thing that they consume. No, they consume a lot of different things, but what I think is true is that they did target these largest animals because you get the kind of most bang for your buck. If you want the most food for the least amount of time, it's going to be the largest game.
There's a lot of controversy over the dates. I've seen you.
Yeah.
What's the earliest accepted almost universally in the educational community?
Yeah, so I would say that the earliest dates that a large portion of people, say 70%, I'm just going to say like 70%. 70% are probably okay with 15,000. Once you start getting much past 15,000, those percentages really, really dwindle down, okay? And so if you're up to the 22,000s, those, well, one, some of those sites are so recent, like White Sands, that, like I said, in the past, 3 to 4 years, you count 10, 15 papers of controversy about that site. So yeah, I mean, I have no problem thinking that people are here 15,000 years ago. It's just when you get to those really, really old sites, there can be a lot of things that are problematic. One, from just a pure scientific, statistical standpoint, archaeologists are actually very good at finding sites, extremely good. If you think about the prehistory of a place like Australia, for example, in a very short amount of time, archaeologists were able to push back a record to 50, 60,000 years ago that people were there. No problem. Here in North America, we have a very, very hard time pushing it past this 13, 15,000 year mark. And so if you wanted to hold a gun to my head or say, I'll give you $1 million if you get it right, it's going to be closer to 15,000 guess, just because you have to think of it from, if people are here 22,000 years ago, why is it so hard to find? Okay, it's all becomes a statistical probability, basically. Yeah.
Professor Gingerich, one of the things that I have noted in some of the literature that I've read is this, what you're talking about, the controversy of the dating.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that in the Metacroft site up by Avella, Pennsylvania, that seemed to be a controversial question of dating. Could you talk a little bit about how archaeologists date? Is it from the geologic record, and is it also from the carbon dating?
Yeah, so most of our good dates, most of our best dates come from radiocarbon, using radiocarbon dating. And so with radiocarbon dating, we can date anything that was once alive. So basically anything organic. Now, when you get into these other techniques, so some of them that are popular ones to use would be something like optically stimulated luminescence. And what this means is geologists are actually able to track and estimate the last time that a sand grain was exposed to light. So the last time that the surface was the surface. And this has been used for some of these very early sites in North America. The problem with that is the deviation, how precisely they can measure that, is usually 1,000 years. And so if you're saying, well, this is a site that's 14,000 years old, plus or minus 1,000 in the error range, it doesn't give you a very precise date. The other issues with radiocarbon dating, and this is some of the questions they have with the White Sands data as well, is you can date old carbon that has been contaminated. The arguments in the 90s and the 2000s about Metacroft rock shelter, that it was the old carbon from the coal that had contaminated the samples. I think that they've done a pretty good job talking through that with Metacroft rock shelter, but there's the same issue at White Sands. They're claiming that some of this old carbon could have contaminated some of the samples. And so those are just a couple examples of the techniques that we use, but radiocarbon dating is the most reliable. And I would tell you, if we could get good radiocarbon dates on all of these sites, we would be much more certain.
But if you don't have the radiocarbon,
Yeah.
then you're basically gonna be confined when you find a flint, looking at the geologic structure of where.
Exactly, so most times you're looking at the stratigraphy and you're looking at something that is above that we know what the age is, maybe it's from radiocarbon. One thing is we know the age range of Clovis really well. And so these sites where we have Clovis and then something below them, we can be very certain that whatever is down there is older than Clovis. But very few of the sites that are these pre-Clovis candidates have that nice tight record. A lot of them are just probably really old sites. There's 3 or 4 sites that I can think of that has pretty good stratigraphy. But there's another 15 sites or more that does not have those good markers. And so yeah, I mean it's very tricky to be able to find good material to date, and sometimes to even know what you are dating. Are you actually dating the occupation of that site, or are you getting charcoal from something else, something that blew into the site? Is, say, the animal that you are dating, is it closely associated with the archaeology itself, for example? Okay. And so, yeah, I mean, in the perfect world, radiocarbon works really well. We can usually get age estimates that says 13,000 or 14,000 years plus or minus 25 years. That's a really good error range if we're going back that far. Some of those other techniques, we don't exactly have that.
But if you find a projectile in a mammoth,
Yeah,
then
Yeah.
that's really good, right?
that is really good. And then hopefully we can date the mammoth better. And most times we can.
Any other questions we have? Yes.
Are they using the same technology to date the petroglyphs?
So petroglyphs, I'll just say up front, I do not know a lot about the dating of different petroglyphs. So there's been a lot of different techniques throughout the years. Some of it has been everything from dating different lichen growth to dating residues. Now, if the petroglyph, if we're also including things that are not carved, was made with something organic like charcoal, sometimes you might have odor preserved, those are things that you could potentially date directly. But rock art in general is one of those difficult things to date, precisely. So yeah.
Other questions? Yes.
Since I told Dan we had to use that microphone, I waited for him to give it to me. But on the maps that you showed, it looked like the highest densities were on the east coast.
Yeah.
So if the prevailing theory is that they come through the land bridge on the west coast, then why is there higher density?
Yeah, so that's a great question. This is something that other archaeologists going all the way back to the 1930s said, hey, if we have the highest number of old projectile points in the east, well, east must be where this technology came from. This is one of the same reasons. This is not the only reason, but this is something that Dennis Stanford talked about with the Atlantic crossing or the Solutrean idea. He said, wow, we have high density, but he argued for other technological similarities between the Solutrean groups, these 20,000-year-old sites in Spain, where they had some similar techniques in making bifaces. And so, yeah, that's a great way to think about it. It could very well be that this is where Clovis was created.
I had one final question, and if we'll take one more and we'll close on that. The question is, how difficult is it because of the fact that much of what you would like to date and find is underwater today?
Yeah, that's a really challenging part. So basically during the last ice age, all the way from the height of the last glacial maximum, all through the time that we've been talking about today, from 13,000 to 12,000 years ago, sea levels were 300 feet lower. This means that there's parts of the eastern shore, for example, that you're missing maybe 200 miles of coastline. And so, yeah, we are missing a lot of sites. Actually, one of the older sites that I showed, Page Laxton, they know that site because they dove. They dove and they excavated it underwater. It is off the coast of Florida, and Florida, if you look at a map, I don't know if I have any maps here that would show that, but we are missing a lot of coastline. Actually, this one shows it. This lime green here, that is all the coastline that used to be here. And it is now gone. So yeah, if people came by boat, whether we're talking about the Atlantic crossing or by a Pacific coast route, we are missing a large inventory of sites. I'll still argue though that if people are here, they're always going to have some interior aspect, and so we should eventually find those sites. But yeah, it makes it challenging.
Any other questions? Yeah. And this is going to be our last one.
I'll stay around for a while, Pat.
Just recently, I teach in free social studies, so a big part of what we teach is about the early civilizations like Cahokia and so I just recently, and can't believe I've lived in Ohio for 49 years and didn't know this, but I recently read about the Buckeye Lake Dam construction that they believe they took down an earthwork in relation to some of the ones we're talking about tonight. The age of that civilization in relation to them, I read that it was something like the
Yeah, so if you're talking about the Hopewell Mounds, which are the best known, they're only about 2,000 years old, and so we are talking about sites 13,000. And so yeah, this is something that I had pointed out in a recent book chapter about Ohio. Is when people think of the archaeology of Ohio, because they are so fantastic, and they really are, the mounds built, whether it was by Nina or the Hopewell, these are relatively recent. And so the people that first, came into Ohio were here 10, 11,000 years before these mounds were ever thought of being built. So you guys have a very long history here, we all have a long history in the U.S. of people being here. All right.